What if your boldest ambitions were backed by high-impact solutions? It all starts with a simple goal, a will to change, a desire to transform your business model, and bring strategies to life, to lead with digital. Transform from the front line of your business to the bottom line of your budget. Envision the future of your next-gen application and infrastructure landscape. Influence today's window shoppers to become tomorrow's brand ambassadors. Improve your odds and turn oceans of data into streams of insight. Ensure that speed to market and quality always go hand in hand. Expand your business horizons by breaking barriers and building opportunities with new levels of flexibility and scalability. Leverage collaboration and best practices that keep you fully focused and cost efficient. Protect your most sensitive asset, your data. Realize a world where communication keeps your employees close and your customers just a tap away. What if you had the people, the industry-focused solutions, the global presence, and access to a solid network of technology partners all in one place to achieve your boldest ambitions? Capgemini. People matter. Results count.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Senior Vice President and Global Oracle Practice Leader for Capgemini, Subir Dutt.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here. Quite excited about coming to San Francisco. I think I've been coming here for the last 10, 11 years, and the level of excitement continues to increase. So when we think about open world and why we are all here, I think the message is pretty consistent, right? What we hear here, what we hear in the media, which is leverage the cloud to drive innovation for your company. But when we take a step back and take a look at our reality, right? We have legacy systems which we can't just rip and replace overnight. When we think about cloud, what cloud components actually make sense for our business, and how do you deal with the different components and even a multi-vendor landscape? And then finally, what's the most effective route to execution? So I'm going to spend the next 30 minutes or so kind of giving some anecdotal data points on that, focusing on just a couple of things from an outcome perspective, which is how do you do all this to have a positive impact on your revenue, to improve your cost structure, and how do you get there quickly? Oops, how do I go back? Okay. Okay. So we, along with MIT, studied 500 large companies and took a look at where they stood in their level of adoption of technology and the digital transformation. And then we categorized them into 4 different buckets. What we found was that the ones who we categorized in the digital master category substantially outperformed their peers with regards to their market results. Higher revenue, better cost structure, higher market capitalization. And what we realized as we took a look at the DNA of these digital masters is that, and this was the great news, that what they do, we can codify that. We can put it in frameworks. And that every company that wants to, every organization that wants to leverage that can. Sure, it's difficult, it takes effort, it takes commitment and leadership, but every company that wants to drive the transformation in their business can. Because we believe we are at an inflection point between the role of business and tech. I mean, tech is the biggest thing in business today. And the inflection point is that companies who are unable to effectively integrate technology are going to have a much harder time in the marketplace. So I guess digital master can sound like a bit of a cliche. So what does that mean? Like, what's an example of that? So I'll give you an anecdotal data point, hypothetical example. So a couple of weeks ago, I walked into an Apple store with 2 MacBooks, which needed to be fixed. Walked up to the Genius Bar, got my appointment. And so the guy came over, he's like, hey, what's wrong? So I said, both laptops, fried keyboards. I just have this problem with coffee. I'm constantly drinking coffee, so guess what, last evening as I'm drinking coffee, boom, fried keyboard. And he goes, oh, and same thing with the second one? Is that your laptop too? I'm like, no, that's not mine, that's my wife's. Just like I have a problem with coffee, she has that same problem with wine. So he chuckled, got my information, looked it up, and he said, normally these cost about $400 to swap out. And in your case, we're going to do it as a courtesy. And then he explained why. I used to be VP of Sales at Oracle and bought a whole bunch of iPods, iPads as giveaways for marketing events. And he says, based on your pattern of buying with us and your future value as a customer, we're going to give this to you as a consideration. One of these models we have in stock, so we're just going to swap it out for you right now. The other is an older one. Mine was the older one. We're going to, as soon as I hit this button here, it's going to get shipped out and you will have it in 2 business days. So when I think about that experience, right, it's really not just about the experience. What happened there was the ability to recognize a customer interaction, the ability to apply big data to figure out what are the considerations you want to do, how can you monetize that. The back office system, so you have visibility into your inventory, and the logistics and supply chain where you can seamlessly deal with getting it delivered 2 business days later. Now, you might think, that was Apple, right? You might think that, yes, Apple's an innovator, of course, that in our specific industry or in your specific industry, you have a little bit more time. What we saw, though, as we looked at these 500 companies, is that every company has digital masters. So regardless of which industry you're in, there are people out there, your competitors, who are innovating and who are using that to fundamentally transform the intersection of technology and business. So we don't have the luxury of time to adapt because our competitors are already doing that. Now, let's take a look at some disruptors in the marketplace and how we can apply their lessons in our domain. So maybe the cliche would be all of these are Uber, Netflix, Airbnbs. They're the new economy companies. It's almost like if you go rock climbing, and we all have a bag of rocks, which is our legacy systems. And they don't, so they're much more nimble and agile. But what if your bag of rocks was actually a backpack full of rocks was actually a backpack full of gold, right? So there's value in what you have. And if we take a look at what they've done and adapt it, and I'm going to give you some anecdotes on that. So let's take a look at what Travis has done with Uber, right? So Uber fundamentally is an on-demand dispatch platform. So let's say you're a banking institution, and you've got, let's say, one of our clients, 80,000 some agents, and one of the things they do is they try and push their loan portfolio, lend more money to consumers. But they're generally locked up in a physical location, or they're locked up in a shared service. So what if we created a platform where when someone has a need, they press the button, and depending on their preference, whether it's an online interaction or whether someone physically shows up at their doorstep 20 minutes later and helps them prosecute the loan application that they're doing, and hence as an outcome of that, you've increased your ability to lend more products in the marketplace. Switching to Netflix. To me, Netflix, I love Netflix. I think we all do, right? 10% of internet traffic. But Netflix fundamentally is about content delivery acceleration. So in your business, whether it's a product you have, whether it's a service, take a look at what are the lessons we can apply towards accelerating the delivery of the product or the service or the offering to your customer base. Airbnb. Now, Airbnb is a little interesting because it's a manifestation of a sharing economy. But again, if you kind of take a step back and take a look at what they've done is they've figured out how to monetize excess capacity. So monetize excess capacity. So any industry where you have capacity, guess what, there's some excess. So let's take a look at a specific example. So in the US, there's about, in the home healthcare industry, so in the US, there's about 3.5 million people who need home healthcare, for chronic conditions or because of old age, et cetera. But the population of providers, people who can actually go provide that home healthcare, it's about 800,000. So about a 7x delta. But I promise you this, someone who goes to a residence and sits for 8 hours providing home healthcare, that there's a lot of excess capacity. There's some watching television, some crossword puzzles, maybe browsing the net. So what if in that model, using medical diagnostics, mobility, et cetera, and capturing vital signs, you set up a platform where you're able to, in real time, determine where there's a need, and based on that, you send the home healthcare provider. And that model could apply just like, so you're taking the excess capacity you have in that 8 hours and you're releasing that. Maybe it's just in a cul-de-sac, maybe it's just in a neighborhood, maybe it's like 20 people who need it in this zip code and there's 3 providers. And based on real-time vitals, sugar level spikes, you send someone, and now you've done 2 things. You've solved the gap between, the 7x gap between providers and people who have the need. And second, you've taken that excess capacity and you've monetized that, and you've transformed home healthcare. The challenge with a lot of what we do, though, is our traditional model of execution is no longer sufficient, right? CFOs no longer have the appetite to take years. They don't like the expense level of that. And if you have a CFO who's a little more relaxed on expenses, let me know. I'll send him my expense reports. Businesses don't want to wait. So our challenge is we also need to accelerate. So that, in a sense, kind of like frames the problem. Now I'm going to move on to the next section as to what really are some of the ways we can address this. What are some of the resolutions and some more anecdotes on that. So to me, hybrid is now the estate of the enterprise. The debate about cloud, not cloud, legacy, not legacy, one or the other, I think we've gone beyond that. And there's a recognition that hybrid is the state of the enterprise. And to me, hybrid is not about the cool stuff or just doing big data or analytics or all the cliches we have. It's really about intersecting emerging technologies with the data, the valuable data you have locked in your legacy systems, and figuring out a way to increase the revenue and improve your cost structure. I mean, if this was like a fairy tale or a story, there are the heroes, which is all of us. There are the villains, which is how do you solve this problem? And there's a pot of gold, which is how do you intersect that and come to an ending where you have an increased revenue and improved cost structure. So let me take a look at a theoretical model, right? And from there, I'll get into some specifics. So on the left, you see the traditional landscape. So to me, using hybrid ERP as an example now, so drilling into the horizontal back office space, it's really an intersection of some of your components are SaaS modules. You use integration. You tie that back to the multitude of legacy systems you have. And there's a lot. It's not just 1 or 2. There's hundreds. But potentially you also take a look at leveraging the public cloud to run your on-premise. And what that allows you to do is recognizing the value of the capabilities you've built over decades, and some of which are stuff you can't rip and replace overnight, and yet allowing you to pull in the cloud where viable, and also leverage the public cloud for scale and performance. So what does this mean? So let's take a look at how do you get there? And I'll actually start off with an anecdote. This past weekend, a couple of days back, I was in Napa Valley at a customer event. And one of the things I was made to do was go to a cooking class with customers. Not a cook, not a chef, no skills. So we got there, and there were 2 guys who were making risotto, others were making fish, etc. So I'm on one side of the table preparing my risotto. There's another guy on the other side doing the same thing. And he knew what he was doing. He loved to cook and all that stuff. And what the school had provided us was the ingredients, the knives, a recipe to follow. And fast forward like about 90 minutes or so, we had our respective risottos ready. When we sat down to eat and when we served ourselves, I was smart. Like I gave myself some of my risotto, then I walked over to his side of the table, took some of his, just to be careful. Yeah. And we sat down to eat. And I took my first bite of his risotto. It was like delicious. It was like mouth-watering. I'm like, good move, Subir. And then just out of curiosity, halfway through the meal, I'm like, let me at least taste mine. Let's see how bad it is. It was delicious too. And what was more surprising, it was identical in taste to what he'd prepared. To me, that was an insight, right? Which is, if you have the right ingredients and the right product sets, and if you have the right recipe, so just like we talked about the DNA of the digital masters, how you can codify it, how you can create frameworks. So the right ingredients in the masters exist where you can have a positive outcome regardless of your level of expertise in these emerging technologies. So just keep that in mind as you take a look at it. I'm going to drill, this is like the money slide, so I'm going to drill into these 5 things, so just kind of bear with me. The specific customer example is they've got about 40,000 employees running a big, heavy, customized traditional back office system. And they've got about 150 BUs, which use a plethora of stuff, smaller divisions, et cetera, different countries. And their cost structure is very high. So the steps, as you take a look at in this scenario, what are the steps to leverage the correct intersection of new and old? Step 1 was determining the right combination of SaaS and PaaS. So what we did was we took a look and we realized that for their core corporate function, they were not ready to move to the financials cloud. So we were fine, keep your ERP. We'll upgrade it and do some stuff to it, but keep that on-prem. But for their 150 BUs, we decided to go to the cloud, Oracle Financials Cloud. So the idea being there's some less stringent requirements in those units. You take those to the cloud, integrate it back. So that was step 1, determining what's the correct mix. The second thing we did was what is the business and the process side of this? The business side is if you're doing, for, let's say, procure to pay. It's if you pay $20 to process an invoice, how do you get it down to 2 or 1, right? Which is not just a technology solution, it's also your process models, your workflows which sit on top of that. So the second thing we did was we took our process model, built over thousands of implementations and said, okay, this is our starting point. Sure, you'll still have gaps between the starting point and what you want to do, but those gaps are business gaps. They're not technology gaps. The third thing is we said, what about leveraging the public cloud? And the client was not ready to take their systems and their on-premise corporate function to the public cloud. They were just a little nervous that if it sits in the public cloud and the data is accessed from the US, some 3-letter acronym agencies can kind of tap into it and look at it, and they didn't want to do that. So they said, what about just using it over the course of your deployment? So eventually when they go into production, it's still going to be on-premise. But over the course of the deployment, they would leverage the public cloud, and that allowed them to do stuff like shrink the project timeline by about 15%. Because if you remember, every project you start, first 4 weeks, it's provisioning environments, then you gotta do the installs, and so on, and then you repeat that multiple times. So using the infrastructure just over the course of the deployment allowed them to get some efficiencies. The fourth thing they looked at is industrialization. And I know it sounds like a little bit of a cliche, but the anecdote here is a couple of years back, Brad Little, one of our senior leaders, said, when we do all these projects, there's a lot of repetitive stuff. What if you took that repetitive stuff, not just the high-level process flows, but what if you took the repetitive stuff down to like configurations, put it in, so when someone starts a program, all of that stuff is there day one. So they're spending their time and their energy in adding business value versus trying to figure out what templates to use, what's the high-level design, how do you configure that in the base application, because that was their starting point. And the final thing is having a DevOps mindset where you're looking at how do you release capabilities fast, and then iterate on by adding additional capabilities over time. So this is kind of the steps. I'm going to now go into a couple of industry examples where I talk about the application of this and what that means. Let's say you're in the healthcare industry, healthcare insurance industry. So this was a client, I think a couple of years back. And they were looking at leveraging Oracle Service Cloud for their call center application. They had this old call center stuff. It crashed like a couple of times a day. Average call handle time was like 11 minutes. So they're like, this is not good. Let's get a better customer experience. Let's use the Oracle Service Cloud. The 11 minutes drops down to about 5 minutes, and that across, I think, about 3,800 agents. It was about a $5-6 million ROI. And it only cost like $700K to put in the Service Cloud 6 months. The challenge for them was that wasn't enough to overcome the organization's inertia. So they asked us, what should we do? And we said, okay, give us a few weeks. We took a step back, looked at it, and we asked them one question. What do you guys really care about? And they cared about two simple things. One was, how do they provide better care to their members? And second, how do they reduce the cost of care? So given that, so to speak, perspective, we came back and said, here's what we recommend, right? Sure, you want to leverage the Service Cloud, but the real power is actually in changing that interaction to address these two objectives. An anecdotal example. So they got approximately 100,000 calls a week from guys or people who hadn't had physicals. And so let's say when someone calls in, says, hey, I have a question, you answer the question in 5 minutes versus 11 minutes, but then the agent prompts the guy and says, hey, John, you haven't had a physical in 3 years. What are you thinking? Right? You got a wife, you got kids, you're not 20, right? And that prompts, let's say, 10% of that 100,000 to go get a physical. And from that population of 10,000, let's say 1,000 find a complication 3 to 6 months in advance. The average value of that in cost savings, plus you're providing better care, the average value in reduced cost of care was approximately $4,800. So let's just say it's 5,000, right? 5,000 times 1,000, it's 5 million. That's in 1 week. And there were other care conditions like people who needed mammograms hadn't done it, people with chronic conditions who didn't refill their prescriptions. But to do this, you needed not just the Service Cloud, you also needed to tap into the legacy data which was sitting in their claim system and like old mainframes and stuff. Take a look at their patient member profile. Do that in real time and apply big data analytics on it to identify the conditions which caused an improvement in care, and leverage the public cloud for some of the scalability and performance they needed to be able to figure this out in like seconds while that interaction is going on. Switching gears to another industry, let's take a look at a CPG industry. So one of our clients, massive marketing budget, with a B in there, so $1.5 billion. And they do what's called hypothesis-based marketing, right? One of the products they sell is ice cream. So hypothesis is it's a warm day, people will eat more ice cream, let's run some campaigns depending on the weather forecast, drives up ice cream consumption. So we interacted with them and we said, let's switch from hypothesis-based to database mindset. So using Oracle's Blue Sky platform, we said, let's take a look at what the data tells us. And what the data told us was pretty interesting. For whatever reason, when it's raining, women between the age of 25 and 35 tend to consume more ice cream. If it's late at night, past midnight, between midnight and 1 o'clock, teenage boys tend to eat more ice cream, right? So now what they started doing is, based on the data, they started their marketing funds campaigns were more personalized and targeted, and hence resulting in a higher revenue impact for them. And the model wasn't static because preferences change all the time. And they also change with seasons. They change based on what sporting events are going on. So it was a dynamic platform. So the model which was deployed in months, and then it iterates and evolves based on what your data is telling us. Switching gears again, let's take a look at another industry example. And actually, my dear friend Shaq Asaraf is presenting on this in another session. I think it's almost over, so if you don't like this and you want to run and catch it, too late. So issue in the telco industry is it's quite complex. By the way, I know this is a really busy slide, but believe it or not, if you click on any of those boxes on the left, they're like the tip of the iceberg. Each one gets even more complex as you drill further down into it. And the challenge we put ourselves, or what Jacques put to us, was, I just want to do this in half the time and half the cost for our customers. Forget about all these cliches of cloud, digital transformation, and big data, and fast data, and high-speed data, whatever. I want to be able to take something to our customers which allows them to go to market half the time, half the cost. So like, okay, sounds like an interesting challenge. What we did was, we took that stack, the Oracle, by the way, RODOT, if you're curious, it stands for like Rapid Offer Design and Order Delivery. It's really, a new iPhone comes out, you want to have a data plan with that, or you want to offer high-speed data with fiber, VoIP, et cetera at home. The ability to take this to market quickly. So if a telco is looking at deploying a solution, so we took the RODOT stack, and we configured that our process libraries, which we developed over our experience with multiple clients in the telco vertical. So wireline, Wi-Fi, cable, 2 gigs versus 10 gigs family plans, mobile devices, all of the different permutations are captured in that. Of course, when we start with this, there are gaps, but now there are business gaps, right? The 5 things we hadn't done before, or the 5 things we needed to change. So that was one. Second, we took that RODOT stack and we put it on a hybrid cloud. What that means is, when the project team starts, earlier you'd take about 6 weeks to provision environments, then you'd take about 2 weeks to just install the baseline. So the first 2 months, people are running around trying to do as is because they didn't have a framework to start working on. Now, day 2, the project team is looking at a fully functional, configured solution specific to that industry, with a process library which addresses the common offers, and now you're focused on addressing further business gaps or data conversions or integrations versus trying to start from scratch. And to top it off, we tied that and integrated to the Oracle CX Sales Marketing Service Engine. So the solution basically became what would take a client 20 million to 2.5 years. That 2.5 years just shrunk down by half. And the cost structure, not only did it shrink by half, it also, some components of it became subscription-based. So when I take a look at all of this, right, and I'll try to tie it to an anecdote. I was flying back from London a couple of months back, and Queen Elizabeth had just became the longest reigning monarch. The one she beat, Queen Victoria, when Queen Victoria became queen at the tender age of 18, the average life expectancy for women was 44. Now it's double, right? 88, give or take. The last time we had a doubling in the human lifespan was 12,000 years ago in the agricultural revolution. So change has always been a constant, but the pace of change is accelerating. Right? In fact, the first person to live to 150 is already born. Right? Same thing in technology. We've always had change. We've always had the cliche, change is a constant. But we're now entering the exponential phase. And the challenge for all of us is, if you want to be relevant in our jobs a year, 2 years, 3 years down the future, we need to have the hunger and the passion to embrace this. And just like making a great risotto, the ingredients and the recipe exist. So that's it from the presentation part. We're going to switch to Q&A. And we have speakers there. Your mic there and there. And once we're done with that, we also have an American Express card drawing. Questions? Should I leave?
In your approach to kind of a hybridized model, what do you think the risk is to organizations that focus solely on migrating targeted systems to cloud services without also revamping their processes and maybe relying on old technologies or old way of doing things?
Okay.
What's the right mix on as you go to a more hybridized model?
So I think if you adopt the cloud, absolutely no question, right? Where you adopt it, you're going to get benefits. It's cheaper, faster, better. But then what you're getting is you're getting IT-level and operational improvements, which is still very substantial. If you want to go beyond that, you actually need to take a look. Actually, let me take a step back. 3 years ago, when we talked to our customers about digital transformation and innovation, we could throw the cliches out there, right? Do digital transformation and be like, yay, great, digital transformation. But now you need specificity, because going beyond the power of cloud to accomplish operational savings, to getting to the point where tech and business, I think technology is the biggest thing in business today, going to the point where you're leveraging technology to fundamentally transform your business model. Because if you don't, you have competitors who are going to have a negative impact on your market position, is essential. So doing this is not easy, right? I get doing this is not easy. I personally think the really, really good news is there's so much pressure, and frankly, the scale and the speed, which are both coming in simultaneously, is going to nudge us more towards using siloed cloud solution in a few areas to looking at that whole multi-vendor landscape, the business impact. And the fortunate thing is, in each and every industry, we have people who have done this. And their DNA, their frameworks can be leveraged by all of us to execute on it. That's a tricky question, actually. So is digital transformation possible without the cloud? Right? So you can fundamentally re-architect, apply processes which will result in massive improvements in your business. But what the cloud, and I'm using cloud in the generic sense of SMAC, social, mobile, analytics, cloud, mobility, security, right? Security is becoming much more of an issue, right? And no matter what you think, the first layer of security is prevention, but that's not the only layer. You have additional layers as well. If you want to have an exponential impact in your ability to go to market, if you want to collaborate between your service and your sales and your customers, if you want to leverage technologies like mobile devices. So the healthcare example I gave, you need diagnostic equipment, but then you also need the cloud to be able to push that out so you can pull the home healthcare person on a real-time basis. If you're a utility and your biggest issue is peak power performance and you're trying to drive that down, you need things like metering with real-time analytics. So when you look at that, not just the cloud, but what the overall cloud platform represents, not leveraging that is like, yeah, maybe you can be a faster bike rider, but you're competing against a car, and no matter how much you increase your speed and endurance, the car is always going to have a leg up on you. Question? Different components, right? So on the operational side, on the IT side, you're looking at, depending on the area, anywhere from 5 to 7x on the tech stack. But the real cost savings we see is an improvement in the function. So you use your IT, maybe you get a 20% saving on your hardware cost, maybe you get a 7x saving on your total infrastructure cost. But what we've seen is if you also address the function, the efficiency, like how you process an invoice or how you monetize a customer interaction or how you deal with as a utility with your consumers to get them to change their power consumption behavior, hence reducing peak power consumption. So it's quite material, and it does vary from industry to industry. The gotcha, though, is while you improve your cost structure, you also need to make investments in enabling technologies, right? So at the macro level, your cost structure may be improving 50, 20%. At the tech stack level, your cost structure, depending on whether it's apps or hardware, might be improving 30% to 7x. But it's really the revenue uplift that agility offers you that, to me, is the true innovator.
So you talked about one of the anecdotes where you got the patient's information and then using the old and the new legacy systems as well. So can you talk about a positive result in Capgemini where you got using the old as well as the new systems and the positive results from there?
Oh yeah, there's a really big one. We used to send like communication by mail, and now we do it electronically using email. Massive improvement in communication. But on a more serious note, generally what we found is for our, like a dev test QA environments, our traditional model is if you want to set up a center of excellence, you had to make a certain hardware investment, certain storage investment, and that's drastically reduced by leveraging the public cloud. When we take a look at certain shared functions like expense management, recruitment, et cetera, so on the expense management side, by leveraging the cloud, we've not only streamlined and reduced the cost of that, we've also reduced spend, right? And if there's like fraudulent behavior, we're able to identify it more easily as well. So the cost went down, but also our spend went down, which is a little bit of a surprise. So there's multiple examples of that. In the digital transformation, how we go to market, how we leverage and release our marketing collateral, how we capture leads, how we, and down to simple things like if you're doing a big show like this, what are the systems you use to allow easy calendaring and taking the whole marketing from the calendaring through the execution phase. So there's a multitude of examples. I think where we still have steps to take is more along the more complex back office systems where we have a lot of richness and a lot of rich data. So recognizing the value of data locked in your systems is a journey. And the reason it's a journey is because what your data tells you keeps changing. So we have to continue being agile in how we listen, absorb, react. And I think that's an area we're still continuing to make progress. Let's see if anyone have a trick question or something to throw me off my feet. Okay, so with that, we wrap.